I'm a designer. Actually, I'm a reformed designer. And standing here, looking at you, looking at me, that sounds like a bit of an admission of guilt, actually. Sort of group therapy. My name's Ben, and I'm a reformed designer. I love being a designer. It allows, maybe forces me to see the world in a different way. And sometimes this is good, and sometimes it's bad. I have some bad habits. For example, I collect a lot of things, a lot of stuff. This is me being a designer. You know, when you collect stuff, you never know. Things might come in handy one day. I think the technical term is hoarder. I take a lot of photos too. All sorts of things as I travel around. I'm not particularly good at taking photos, but I like to capture moments, experiences. And I went to Brussels a few weeks ago on Eurostar. There's some photos of some things I took along the way. So some fancy chocolate packaging, and yes, it was as expensive as it looks. Some armoured vehicles near the station. They've had a tough time recently. They're clearly keen to send out messages that are both threatening and also reassuring, and that obviously depends perhaps on the viewer's perspective. I took a photo of the decoration in the toilet cubicle on Eurostar. Wait, Max, you're not recording this, are you? Oh, you are? Okay, good. Okay, moving on. Someone put a little bit of thought into improving this dark but necessary little corner of the train, and they added some flowers, a picture of the Mona Lisa, who is winking, by the way. That's a little weird. Okay, it was just a vinyl overlay. It wasn't a very elegant execution. But you know what? Those thoughtful little touches marginally improved a few moments of my day. Today I want to talk about how different front-end innovation perspectives can build robust specifications, reduce NPD risk, and increase return on investment. And I think I could be a bit bold and imagine that that's probably our collective goal, our collective holy grail. And the route to doing this is finding out not what customers value, not necessarily what they want, and especially not necessarily what they say that they want. As Alvin Toffler famously said, the future arrives too soon and in the wrong order. And yet our paymasters expect us all as senior innovators to figure this stuff out. Over the next few minutes, I want to reflect on the way the world is changing around us. I'm going to talk about market research, about the role of design and designers, and then research again from a different perspective, a perspective we call research for innovation, to consider the implications on us and our businesses on tackling the biggest challenges and risks head on. The world is changing fast. 88% of the companies who are listed on the Fortune 500 when it was created in 1955 no longer exist. Wow. These are the organisations who, in their time, were quite literally the biggest and most successful businesses in the world, the very best at what they did. What went wrong? How could they have possibly misread the signs? Speaking of misreading signs, another photo I took in China recently. What could go wrong? Just as interesting, how come some of today's most successful businesses didn't exist back then? And many eminent business thinkers have considered the rise and ultimate demise of these once great Goliaths of industry. Some of the original Fortune 500 leaders include Collins Radio, for example. You know, Collins Radio? Okay, Studebaker Cars. It's sad that so many of these once great employers now draw blank looks. And of course, there are more familiar casualties. Eastman Kodak, a company who was doing $16 billion in sales, over $1 billion in profit, with over 40,000 employees globally in 1992, filed for bankruptcy in 2012. The speed of decline is pretty sobering. The conclusions, and I'm paraphrasing because time is short, seem to suggest that these businesses became extremely good at what they did in the moment. Being extremely good at a point in time, even if it was an extended point in time, was a significant contributor to eventual failure. They had success, they got big, they scaled up drives for commercial efficiency, they implemented harmonization processes, streamlined the supply chain, created corporate structures, all the stuff we would expect them to do. They fixated on themselves, working in a bubble of the successful here and now. And of course, there were the brands, the product ranges, the sacred cows, the things that exemplify the universal equities and consistency of the value proposition. They fixated on their current customers and the fixed view the businesses, had of their customers and brand proposition. And yet, paradoxically, All of these things, the very things that on the one hand promoted and epitomised success, became blinkers that very slowly but surely started to constrain thinking and attitudes to risk, particularly innovation risk. I think if we're honest with ourselves, these are challenges that still remain today. Is it any surprise that multinationals remain in awe of the agility of lean startups? They struggle to replicate that speed of growth and are subsequently drawn to the acquisition model rather than doing certain activities internally. Using lean startup principles, Dropbox is a famous success story that accelerated from 100,000 users to over 4 million users in little more than a year. Eric Ries points out in his book some of the things that lean startups actively try and avoid, and many other sources add a lot more insight into how traditional innovation models go wrong. And these are things like long technology development cycles, the high cost of getting the first customer, the even higher cost of getting it wrong, the limited number of people with the appetite or experience for startup risks, and the structure of the traditional venture capital industry. The frameworks in place in big, traditionally structured businesses and the momentum behind an iconic or highly established brand make building breakthrough product and brand innovations from scratch seem a daunting hill to climb. Did anyone hear the recent news of Unilever acquiring Dollar Shave Club? No? Anyone know how much for? $1 billion! Oh my goodness! $1 billion. Does anyone know how old this business is? Barely 5 years old. I mean, with the greatest sense of jealousy, I mean respect to the billionaire entrepreneurial team who set this Dollar Shave Club up. And of course, the colleagues in the room from Unilever. If you try and ignore the marketing, which is hard because it is brilliant, it is just a mail-order razor business. Now, of course, I can completely understand some of the strategic motivations for the move. Instant direct-to-consumer retail leadership, taking on other industry giants for a stake in the razor business, I get all of that. It's probably a piece of investment lateral thinking that will pay handsomely in due course. But is there any logical reason why the innovation might of Unilever, owners of some of the most successful personal care brands in the world, could not have created this business internally from scratch? Probably by spending a whole lot less than $1 billion. In my view, no, there's not. So back to our original Fortune 500. What went wrong? Why, with all the market research resources that must have been at their fingertips, did 88% of those founding companies fail? Have you ever commissioned a market research report to inform future breakthrough innovation and found yourself suffering a nagging doubt that, for all its shininess, it only really considers what is trending now, the way customers are making choices in the context of products and brands and capabilities now? You kind of struggle to extrapolate it to a more distant future. Have you ever felt that market research report is maybe too consumer-centric or ignores or under-accounts for some of the other stakeholders and their needs, perhaps limiting the scope of the opportunity? In our view, there's 3 possible reasons for this nagging doubt. 1, you're doing traditional market research. Market research is like has a valuable role to play, but it's like a rear-view mirror. It can tell you in precise detail where you've come from, but not necessarily where you're going. And I love the irony in the bottom of this mirror. There's a message about things being distorted. What you really need is innovation sat-nav. 2, maybe the agency you use, they're just not as good as researching for the future as they are at researching for the past. They weren't asking the right questions in the right way, and they weren't observing the answers in a holistic, objective way. Regardless of what this research participant says or doesn't say, she's showing me implicitly as a designer what action I need to take. Or 3, it's because the agenda was set for them. I love this cartoonist, and I've got a few more. If you can't see at the back, it says, when I asked you to think outside that box, I forgot to ask you to think inside this one. Someone told that research company where to look. Unwittingly, it's very possible they over-parameterized the focus of the activity in the context of the current business model, the current brands, the current route to market, meaning the conclusions were somewhat inevitable. This is a big problem, not framing the research appropriately, and by that I mean objectively enough to allow for the unexpected, the breakthrough insights to materialize, but focused enough that it doesn't cost the earth and take forever. Arguably, even worse than that is not being given the chance to carry out any formative research at all. Have you ever found an internal development process demands or maybe even begins with the subjective creation of concepts? Comic insinuations aside, does this classic innovation funnel seem familiar, where ideas get generated in a fairly spontaneous way and then fed into the mouth of the funnel, and precious time and budget is used to prove or filter one of those specific solutions, rather than initially at least exploring the field of interest without conceptual constraint? The problem with this approach is there's little to reassure you that the best concepts have been created, or it's even the right brief that you're working on. It's interesting to note that Bob Cooper, the inventor of the stage gate process that many of us probably now use every day, actually advocated this approach until a few years ago, when he updated his thinking to include a discovery activity that happens before ideas are generated. The problem, of course, with this old approach is that idea conception lacks the objectivity or the rigour that's necessary to uncover and translate that evidence from discovery into targeted ideas and concepts. And we have to do evidence gathering that is far-reaching. Market research methodologies do allow us to apply all manner of valuable data analysis tools and explore past performance on sales and habits and trends and so on. They also allow us to explore concept and product preference, and a really important part of the MPD process at the right time. But the problem with traditional market research is that it remains very grounded in the past, or at best the here and now. It's typically very consumer-centric and more often than not product-focused, and in our view, overly so. Yeah, not a good one. Often bound to traditional segmentation and other data analysis and prediction models, it provides a very short-term future horizon into which to innovate. This makes it particularly challenging to spot disruptive innovations coming, whichever form they take. E-cigarettes, for example, an industry that was embryonic just 5 or 6 years ago, is now worth $6 billion annually, and some reports suggest could be more than $50 billion by 2025. Which market research reports saw that coming? The first documented reference to an electric vaporizer is a patent granted to Joseph Robinson in 1930. Herbert Gilbert is generally credited with the creation of the first device that most closely resembles a modern e-cigarette in 1965. And yet it took another 45 years to find its place in the consumer psyche and the market due to a range of converging and competing external and commercial influences, increasing health awareness, manufacturing cost point, legislation, tax, and so on. And of course, a new genre, vaping, is now emerging, which has its own nuances. In fact, there's some very interesting experiential similarities to the days when branded tobacco was very much an outward reflection of personality, and every street corner had a tobacconist making bespoke blends and selling all manner of gadgets and accessories. So these pioneering inventors were an example of working on new technology, tech push, if you like, without having the insight to predict the market conditions and vitally the timing of when it would ultimately gain traction. Now, of course, tech push is a legitimate way of developing innovation strategy, but it is more difficult to predict the returns on investment and also the potential timing of achieving them. So if you're working in R&D, how do you know it's the right technology you're working on? For those of you in research and development, is the link between market and innovation research input and scientific or technical R&D activity sufficiently strong, sufficiently integrated, sufficiently coherent? These are tough challenges, and as professional innovators, these are the everyday mountains we have to climb. We only have so much time, we only have so many resources. Having been lucky enough to work with some amazing businesses over the years, from startups through to billion-dollar global brands, my observation is that the biggest problems many businesses have is not the lack of marketing reports, or frankly, even the lack of great internally generated ideas. It's knowing which research insights are the most important and which ideas are the best, the most relevant to tomorrow's customer, and how to target precious resources on developing the highest priorities most effectively. This early stage of innovation is perhaps the most dangerous period in the life of an embryonic MPD program, and we hear a lot of questions arising. One of the principal confusions is whether the voice of the customer is important. I can confirm the voice of the customer is incredibly important, but with listening comes great responsibility. We have to be accomplished moderators to discern between what consumers and other stakeholders say and do and are trying to achieve, even if they're key opinion leaders, and sometimes especially if they're key opinion leaders. This guy has a white coat, he knows everything, right? This man may be very, very good at his job, but that's not the same thing as being able to accurately tell me what I should design for him in 10 years' time. We have to filter these references that are made to existing solutions, and therefore what's fundamentally superficial noise and what we observe and determine as innovators that these stakeholders are ultimately trying to achieve as goals or desired outcomes. And observation is the critical tool. Some of the most pivotal insights come from behaviours that stakeholders are unaware of and therefore wouldn't be able to articulate in a direct line of questioning. So if you're in the business of creating breakthrough innovation, and I mention that because there are, of course, a variety of perfectly legitimate approaches to developing innovation strategy, such as category maintenance. But if you're focusing on breakthrough, you're probably not trying to find out how to polish an existing solution. So it needs a different mindset. It needs an approach to deep research that systematically creates a comprehensive landscape of evidence, and above all, which aims to understand how your customers and stakeholders measure value. It ranks those metrics of value by importance to them, to stakeholders, and the level of satisfaction when measured against existing solutions. And this is blended with many other inputs to create a business case framework, and we call it research for innovation. And while it borrows from some of the tools from market research, it's not the same as market research. It looks beyond what the market says, it looks beyond what consumers say, it looks beyond the current products and services and focuses on the jobs that the stakeholders are trying to get done. As Clay Christensen puts it, when customers become aware of a job that they need to get done in their lives, they look around for a product or service to hire to get that job done. The driving point of difference with a jobs to be done approach is that it captures insights and needs and desired outcomes and ranks them into actionable statements. And this in turn allows us to create a detailed solution-independent specification for new concept creation. Okay, what does this look like in practice? We recently worked with Zillis to develop a breakthrough set of knives. When we applied the methodology to understand what consumers valued, and I'm fast-tracking here in the interests of time, it turns out that one of the most important underserved needs when quantitatively ranked remains improved knife control, and within that a number of sub-parameters of control. Now, you'd think this would be a problem the knife industry would have sorted out some time ago, right? We've had knives for a while. One of the biggest killers of potentially great ideas is when the right need has been identified, but when the wrong or a suboptimal design solution has been created. And this is why it's vital to test the desired outcomes and the design concepts separately so that you can see the difference, i.e. a need tests very strongly, but a design solution tests very badly. And it's classic systematic design of experiments. We can work out where the problem is. So by the end of our rapid research for innovation phase, we'd captured all of the parameters of performance, 96 desired outcomes, 39 emotional statements, 14 related jobs, each of which we then applied 25 different innovation themes to, and we robustly validated and prioritised those in a quant survey of several hundred responses. This is just a knife. Imagine doing this with a critical care ventilator. Remember, we had not formally created any concepts at this point, any visual concepts, and we hadn't carried out a traditional concept test, and yet we knew statistically what was important to people, independent of colour, form, surface finisher, material, price point, and all the rest of it. So by using the job as the unit of research analysis rather than the customer or the product, we were able to carry out a far more inclusive approach. Of course, not all customers are the same, and even the same people have different needs in different contexts. Compare and contrast with traditional market research approach, which typically uses very crude segmentation models such as age or demography to work out what people want. But even with all this rich information, we're not out of the woods yet. This is still a very dangerous time for an embryonic innovation. How do you consistently translate deep insight into winning solutions? Well, effective translation of insight is a critical element, obviously, of the research for innovation approach, and we feel designers are central to this approach. They now need to get involved far further upstream than's ever been previously industry practice. Designers need to work hand in hand with researchers and, by the way, technologists, strategists, scientists and so on from the very beginning. Being present at the earliest formative research, our design team were inspired to create patented touch points for the handle and a finger indent to assist precision chopping. Now, this may sound superficial, but it's really important to understand that we can still innovate in mature or commoditized markets. And the beautiful thing about this approach is that it writes your key messages for you. They're 100% explicit. You can focus exactly on the jobs the consumers are trying to achieve. We've heard a lot in recent years about design thinking. In fact, we've had a surge of inquiries recently saying, do you do design thinking? And I find this a really weird question. I mean, I'm an industrial designer. I spend every minute of my waking day and, to be honest, probably more of my semi-conscious night thinking than I'd actually like. I've never considered an approach that doesn't rely on immersive research and multidisciplinary teams and divergence and convergence of ideas and mock-ups and prototyping as anything other than my day job. Certainly we're trying to evolve our approach constantly. We've just installed a hack space in our R&D facility in Cambridge to try and lower the barriers and costs for our team of rapid experimentation even further, and at some point we hope to be able to allow our clients to come into this space and work with us in there. Now, I know what they're getting at, but seriously, it's like design thinking is a thing. Like, do you have SolidWorks or an environmental chamber, or can I get a certificate in it? The thing is, industrial design is evolving. Once upon a time, when you said industrial design, everyone knew what you meant in a fairly narrow, typically product-centric sort of way, what you meant. But with the growth of digital and the increasing focus on the user, industrial designers have had to evolve and redefine the way in which they explore the world and define solutions. The boundaries are blurring. Industrial designers now have to do service design, systems design, interfaces, experience design, and much, much more. In fact, design of experiences really summarises everything that I think we should now be focusing on as innovators, and I think that's a theme that's come across quite strongly so far through this conference. If these creative boundaries weren't blurring, and if that blurring wasn't being driven by the design practitioners themselves, how would Jonathan Ive get up every day, knowing he'd played a role in reducing the discipline of industrial design to the most basic of geometric forms? You know, products and technologies are simply the enablers of the functional and emotional experiences that we're all seeking as consumers, as validated by the recent high-profile court case. You've probably all seen the design patent which Apple successfully defended a few years ago. In Apple's words, a tablet with slightly rounded corners, a flat transparent surface without any ornamentation, a thin profile. And of course, in the US, Apple's claims of monopoly ownership were backed by the Court of Appeals, who decided their IP was valid and Samsung infringed. What was fascinating was that a UK judge rejected the design infringement claim, writing, "The Galaxy tab line does not have the same understated extreme simplicity which is possessed by the Apple design. They are not as cool." Okay, so although it was technically a positive legal judgment for Samsung, it was clearly framed in a very unwelcome way. You know, the judge considered it unreasonable that Samsung be expected to differentiate the front of its device, given that ultimately it was constrained by the industry standard touch display. But by using the word cool, he determined that the product experience was different, even though virtually every other technical parameter was similar. Now, whichever side of the Apple-Samsung battle lines you pledge your allegiance, I thought this was a very insightful ruling. I'm not an academic, and I'm certainly not a philosopher, but I have been knocking around the industry for a while. And in my view, we're in the business of creating experiences, and I think we can boil everything that we do in our lives as innovators down to one simple mantra. Businesses who create and deliver the best experiences for a targeted context will win, and those who create suboptimal experiences will lose. You may be in the process of creating white label sanitary products, but if the value proposition delivers the best experience for a given range of contextual parameters, jobs to be done, price point, brand promise, occasion, sensory qualities, and so on, same woman, different context or occasion, potentially different product experience requirements. We don't know. We have to find out. Building our experience solution further, one of the management consultancies recently ran a major survey across companies in Europe and found that those who design products and services as a system are more profitable and grow at 5 to 7% faster on average than companies that design products and services separately. So those who are delivering great experiences are ahead, fact. So we must look beyond the product. Our customers expect us to. This is why methodologies like Doblin's 10 types of innovation are so important. And Tassimo is a really useful example here. They've got the appliance, they've got the pods, they've got the co-branding through their networks of flavours, they've got direct-to-consumer retail, and so on and so on. We have to look beyond that single experience channel, if you will. But achieving this convergence of professional perspectives to make this stuff happen is really challenging, and we all know that stuff. While traditional business structures don't help maybe as much as they could, we can still rely on each other's expertise. Market researchers see the world a certain way. They mine it for data, for trends, for facts, for perspectives to help make sense of the world. They listen and absorb impartially and without judgment. This is our first very valuable perspective. However, designers can't do that. They're hardwired to see and hear challenges and insights and opportunities and begin conceiving solutions. And I've seen creatively brilliant designers who I would never let moderate the objective part of a consumer research interview because they just struggle to be impartial. They jump straight in with solutions. What do you think about this? You know, what do you think about that? But my goodness, the value of having there, observing that research is priceless. They will listen and watch as the interview or observation unfolds, drawing, taking notes, and towards the end of the interview, they can begin to ask some very penetrating, solution-targeted questions, helping that sort of beginning of that co-creation process, this translation of insights into solutions. This second perspective is very valuable because the very qualities that make market researchers good at what they do make them less able to translate insight into actionable design parameter. Innovation researchers are our third capability, and they are, to be honest, the industry freaks. Has anyone seen the Divergent trilogy films? That's us, the people that don't fit in. They typically have a design, engineering or science education, and actually less so that I've seen from a pure market research background. And they've only come to strategy and innovation research later in careers, frustrated by the technology push approach and motivated by this desire for a more systematic understanding of the stakeholder environment and a better way of creating specifications for consistently successful idea generation. They're able to switch these different filters on and off to help them dig deeper, see further and translate more effectively. And this team of innovation researchers and designers use three main pillars of inquiry to build this front-end innovation business case. And this is real Donald Rumsfeld territory. You know, the things we know, the things we don't know, and the things we don't know, we don't know. Now, whatever your perspective on people called Donald at the moment, I quite like this analogy. You know, we have to find these things out. We have to look at the strategic landscape, the external mega, micro, macro trends, the drivers of change, paint a picture of where we are now, the state of the competitive and wider environment. Then there's the eternal strategic picture, your own vision, capabilities, core competencies, available resources, infrastructure, brands, appetite and aspirations for growth. We have to research and workshop this stuff to the surface. Then there's the technology landscape. What do you have? What do others have? What's the state of the art? Then there's the needs environment, and this is critical that we consider this multi-stakeholder environment. So often the flaw in a success of a product is an incomplete consideration or an incorrect prioritization of the different stakeholders at the different steps in the value chain. In some environments, of course, the traditional idea of the end consumer as a product use recipient is challenged completely. Take a medical procedure. In most cases, the person being treated will be unaware of what products are being used to treat them and unlikely to have any influence on the brand choices. So the choice that is made for them can have a major impact on their outcomes in the right hands of the user. In other areas, of course, patients, carers, HCPs, insurers all have significant and sometimes conflicting perspectives, and all of this needs to be accounted for through research. At the end, of course, you have a vast amount of highly robust and statistically validated information upon which to begin generating concepts and to apply R&D efforts. You have a business case. And doing this rigorously, you've taken out a lot of the risk from your downstream innovation program. In relative terms, certainly in the context of a global NPD program, a very small upfront investment to optimize a specification could save many millions downstream and increase many more in ROI in the future. I work with designers, engineers, strategists, researchers and so on. We work together from the earliest days of a new inquiry to build an innovation business case together and bridge those gaps in our collective knowledge. By doing so, we each become stronger multidisciplinarians. I'll finish with an example. I was having a coffee a few months ago with some of our software engineering colleagues, and we felt there could be an opportunity to develop a new tool to add even more robustness to our innovation research process. After holding a mirror up to ourselves, i.e. what were our desired outcomes as a research team, what were our competencies as a business and so on, we came up with this idea of a multifunctional data logger that could go in a shampoo bottle or in a drug delivery device to kind of find out what's really going on, what people are really doing. And then, because we got on and prototyped one. And this conversation would never have happened if we'd not been able to understand and respect and empathise with each other's worlds and skills and meet in the middle. If you want to know more about that, come and have a chat to me or Tom in the break. I've spoken long enough, but I want to summarise. The world is changing around us, and it's changing very fast, and as professional innovators, we need to be very, very agile. Market research tools provide valuable data, but they struggle to extrapolate to a more distant future, and particularly to spot disruptive innovation coming. Designers accompanying immersive research can play a critical role in helping to generate and co-create and translate those insights into concepts, ideally from the very earliest stages of a project, helping to de-risk downstream solutions. 3, researchers for innovation bring together information from a range of sources, and they use their blend of experience and forward-looking research tools to create and test specifications for future opportunities that are initially independent of product concepts. They focus on the jobs. By bringing these lenses together in a comprehensive front-end programme, we can remove a lot of the subjectivity, we can manage risk more effectively, and vitally, we can close those translational gaps between insights and solutions. We need each other. We need to constantly evolve if we're to be truly successful innovators. And I'll let Alvin have the final words on the industry freaks. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Thank you very much for listening.